Let's go live now to Queen's Park, where the province's Auditor General is set to release several value for money audits in their reports. Let's listen in.
Services. It also includes our annual reporting on the operation of the Environmental Bill of Rights and government advertising. In a number of our audits, we have seen improvements made during the course of our work. For example, the Ministry of Health announced an investment in its new hubs model for treatment services for addictions and homelessness. Legislation has been proposed to create new standards and penalties to address misrepresentations by immigration consultants, and the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing has introduced a new framework for MZOs and is revoking MZOs for projects that are not moving fast enough. These are steps in the right direction, but as I will outline, in many cases, further work in these areas is still needed. I will now share some of our key findings from this year's performance audits. In our report on Minister's Zoning Orders, or MZOs, we found that between 2018 to 2023, a total of 114 MZOs were made. We found that none of the information packages that the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing prepared for the Minister during this time contained an assessment as to whether the MZO was necessary, including if it would expedite the project as opposed to using the normal municipal planning process. During our audit, the Ministry implemented a new zoning order framework to provide a consistent set of expectations for MZOs. Based on our review of the framework, it addresses some of the issues we found, but it was not designed to address many of the others, such as a lack of identification of site issues and impacts on previously planned developments, assessment of the potential financial impacts, and timely identification of environmental and agricultural impacts. We found in our audit of the Ontario Place redevelopment that the estimated total cost to the province is now $2.2 billion, including the Science Centre. As the master developer, the province is responsible for over $950 million in costs to develop Ontario Place, including costs for the public realm, parking, and connecting public transit from Exhibition Place to Ontario Place. None of these costs were presented to decision makers when Infrastructure Ontario and the Ministry of Tourism recommended a multi-partner approach. A comprehensive site-wide solution could have covered some or all of these costs. The estimated cost of relocating the Ontario Science Centre to Ontario Place has increased nearly $400 million from the March 2023 business case that recommended the new building. We also found that the call for development process was not fair and transparent. For example, one of the participants was allowed to submit after the submission deadline and was presented as the preferred master developer, while others were ranked higher. The call for development document also stated that no communication with government staff or appointed officials is permitted during the call for development process. As a result, a transaction advisor was hired to be the liaison for participants. Contrary to this, our audit found that some participants had communication and meetings with government staff during the open period. We also conducted an audit of Infrastructure Ontario, where we looked at the procurement and delivery of 3 large infrastructure projects that saw significant cost overruns and delays. The Trillium Health Partners Mississauga Hospital was still in the pre-construction phase at the time of our audit, but the project is estimated to be more than $4 billion over the current approved budget. This is due to an increase in the size and the capacity of the hospital and a significant increase in market rates for construction. We also found that the challenges in attracting bids for public-private partnerships, like the Trillium Hospital, continue despite recent changes to delivery models. For instance, the procurement for 2 different hospital projects using this model received only a single bid by the same company. The Lakeridge Gardens long-term care home was one of 4 homes built under the accelerated bid program. We found homes built under this program cost about 50% more than those built under traditional construction methods. Our audit also found that the Highway 427 expansion was delayed by 1 year due to safety concerns, which were not identified until the project was close to completion. The project costs have not been finalized, but it's estimated to be $98 million over budget. The Ontario Land Tribunal, or OLT, has a mandate to resolve disputes related to land use planning and other matters covered by over 50 statutes. We found that despite more funding and staff, the OLT has not reduced overall pending cases. Prior to requesting $29 million in additional funding, no analysis was conducted to understand the root causes of possible delays. We also found that 90% of the appeals related to proposed developments were approved. While we did not identify any biases in our analysis of the tribunal's decisions, our recommendations speak to the importance of further strengthening OLT's independent adjudicative process. In Canada, the federal government sets immigration targets and manages permanent residency applications. In 2023, 21% of economic immigrants came through the Ontario Immigration Nominee Program. Ontario's main input to the federal government for economic immigration. Inspections of the program applicants by the Ministry of Labour, Immigration, Training and Skills Development identified high rates of misrepresentation. We found that in 2023, only 3% of all applicants were inspected by the ministry and 9% from high-risk streams. The program has also not used available enforcement tools. As of April 1st, 2024, 87% of recommended monetary penalties had not been issued. Given that the majority of economic migrants come to Ontario through the federal programs, the ministry needs to better coordinate with the federal government to make sure Ontario's labour needs are being considered. We also conducted an audit of safety, financial management, and capital at the Toronto District School Board. Regarding safety, TDSB's rate of violent incidents is lower than the provincial average, but it is at its highest that it's ever been recorded. And the system for tracking incidents of bullying needs improvement. Compared to other school boards in the province, TDSB's school buildings are in the worst condition. Also, the board continues to have an operating deficit. The audit identified areas for efficiencies, such as reducing the use of sick days and paid leave. We found that TDSB could do better with data and inform operational decision-making, such as assessing operational costs on a per-school basis. In our audit of Service Ontario, we found that the rate of online services being made available in the last 10 years has been slow. Service Ontario does not have an online option for more than half of its 784 sub-services, even for some related to high-demand products such as driver's licenses and health cards. We also found that over the past 5 years, only 33% of transactions were completed online, compared to their target of 50%. In comparison, other provinces have made progress in rolling out emerging technologies that are not yet available in Ontario. For instance, in BC, digital IDs have been used to streamline the process of verifying identities. Mobile applications and chatbots are also used to provide faster and more convenient services and access to services in other provinces. In our audit of the implementation of the oversight of Ontario's opioid strategy, we found that the province's 2016 strategy is outdated and does not address the increased needs and risks, including the availability and potency of opioids from illegal markets. The decision to introduce legislation to close 10 supervised consumption sites and transition to the province's new hub model is a shift from harm reduction to treatment and recovery. Investing more in treatment, recovery, and housing is a positive development toward addressing the opioid crisis. Prior to introducing the legislation, the Ministry of Health did not assess the impact of the closure of the supervised consumption sites, which is an evidence-based approach for harm reduction to reduce overdoses. Nor did they develop a plan to migrate the risks introduced by the change as of yet. We found the ministry lacks credible and complete data about demand, supply, and outcomes of opioid addiction services. Collecting provincial mental health and addictions data is critical to help the ministry make evidence-based decisions and improve services. The Environmental Bill of Rights, or the EBR, has been in place since 1994, and we've reported on the operation of this act since 2019. Consistent with past years, we continue to find cases of ministries not meeting their EBR obligations, including the province passing legislation without full EBR consultations. In the case of Ontario Place, the province exempted the Ministry of Infrastructure from having to use the Environmental Registry to consult the public on the Rebuilding Ontario Place Act, even though the ministry expected the act would have environmentally significant implications. Our office has been required to report on government advertising, including expenditures since 2005. This year, we found the government spent $103.5 million on investments in 2023-24, the highest spent on government advertising since it has been recorded. Of these expenditures, $90.7 million were ads that were subject to our office's review. Our office continues to identify those ads that would not have passed our review under the original version of the Government Advertising Act. They are ad campaigns where, in our assessment, the primary objective of the ad is to foster a positive impression of the governing party. In our past fiscal year, our office flagged 5 campaigns totaling $63.7 million, or about 62% of the government ad expenditures. Now, as part of this year's annual report, we have also included a report on the public accounts of the province. As well, we followed up on the status of our recommendations from our 2022 and 2019 reports. The results of these 2-year and 5-year follow-up work is included in our annual report. For audits issued in our 2022 annual report, we found progress has been made toward implementing close to 62% of our recommended actions, including 40% that have been fully implemented. Now, our work could not be possible without the support and cooperation of our auditees across the public and broader public sectors. On behalf of my office, I thank our auditees for your support in completing this year's audits and their work in implementing our previous recommendations. Both our office and auditees are working toward the same goals: improving the province's programs and services. I would also like to extend my appreciation to our dedicated team who worked on this year's audits, including my senior management team, many who are here today. And of special note, I'd like to thank and extend my wishes to Assistant Auditor General Gus Shigani, who is retiring this year after close to 30 years of service with the office. Lastly, I'd like to thank the Standing Committee on Public Accounts for their work and support this year in our parliamentary system. Together with the Auditor General and the Public Accounts Committee, we play a critical role in accountability and improving public administration. I look forward to continuing to support the committee in its work. Thank you, and I will now take your questions.
When it came to the Ontario Place audit, what stood out to you the most? Because our impression is that the Premier's office was intimately involved in the entire process from beginning to end.
Well, it was done under the real estate directive, which you will find in our report. And the issue that we had is there is a quote in the call for development document itself that says that the participants will not have access to government staff. And that is not what happened. We have a chart in the report. They did have access to government staff from various places, and it just goes against the rules that they had stated themselves in their document.
The public take that as an indication that the Premier's office or government staff were involved or in some way guiding the process, shaping it from within, contrary to what a typical call for development process should look like?
So what's interesting is that there isn't really a typical call for development process. There is a procurement process, which this was not part of. So we do recommend in our report that if they were to do something like this where they want to get a lot of great ideas about what to do, they should start with a request for qualifications or a request for information from parties, and then narrow it down, make decisions, narrow it down, and then go to a request for proposal type of situation where there's more rules, there's more concrete evaluation processes, etc. Now, I can say the evaluation team members were not from the ministers' or premiers' offices.
But when you see evidence of one company not quite making the criteria set out by the government, and then all of a sudden that criteria changing after having conversations with people in the office and then being elevated to one of the preferred candidates, does that indicate that someone in the Premier's office had their thumb on the scale here?
We have no evidence of that. We pointed out the timeline to show how things worked through the development process, to show that certain things occurred at certain times, and we did not we do not have any evidence of the Premier's office interfering in the process.
On the minister's zoning orders, you suggested that they aren't that effective in terms of speeding up housing, sometimes places without servicing, that there wasn't really a process in place internally. From what you've seen, do you have an impression of what the government was actually trying to achieve here with the MZOs?
So I do believe that a lot of municipalities come to the government and ask for an MZO. So I do believe that the intention is to speed up development processes. What we find, though, that there is a lot of details that would normally happen during a planning process with a municipality that don't happen with the MZOs. So I think the full intent is to expedite development, but it just doesn't always work.
You outlined a few examples with municipalities and the government not questioning either the information given to them by municipalities or by developers through municipalities. Are there any concerns about sort of another way to lobby here? That perhaps developers could lobby municipalities, municipalities would give that to the province, and then the province would just approve it kind of sight unseen?
So we didn't investigate lobbying when it came to the MZOs. We did, there is a case study in the report that I'll direct you toward that did discuss a lobbying effort at one point, but we didn't look into that at the municipality level at all.
You did look at the system. Do you think that is a potential flaw in that system?
I believe that when you have a system where, in this case, we did see a staff member asking to expedite an MZO to prioritize it. We made a recommendation that when you are doing that you should document the reasons why. So you're very open, fair, and transparent as to the reasons why something's being expedited, which would stop that thought that perhaps it was because of a lobbyist.
On that opioid report, do you think that closing the supervised consumption sites will cost lives, given what you found?
We found that the supervised consumption sites currently have, for the 10 that are closing, have prevented 1,500 overdoses. So there is a potential that those overdoses could occur elsewhere if they're not happening in the safe consumption site. That's forward-thinking information. I can't say one way or another, but we do know that they do work, and they had prevented 1,500 overdoses.
Did you get any indication from the province why they did not study what impact the closing of the sites would have on the health and safety of drug users?
So we did look at the submission for this decision, and they are still doing ongoing work around the risks of overdoses, et cetera. But the submission was put together for the heart hubs, which is great, but it didn't have that detail in it yet. So we do encourage them to look into those risks.
Back to the MZO's report, there's a few instances where it's mentioned that the Premier's office wanted them done in certain times or gave certain directions. Did you get any impression of why the Premier's office did in these cases?
So what our evidence was exactly was an email from a staffer in the minister's office that said that the Premier and the Minister wanted to expedite the MZO. We did not find any evidence of that ourselves in any other place. So it was just in an email. We did not have emails from those people to that staffer. So it is basically we did not have that evidence.
Is it a rogue staffer, or what's your conclusion?
Sorry?
Is it a rogue staffer, or what's your conclusion then?
We can't really conclude. We just saw the evidence of the email itself and noted that in our report.
And then also
Is that
just
normal, though, just to have one email referencing that sort of thing, right? Like, does that suggest to you that other conversations were possibly taking place in other places that weren't being recorded? If there's only that one email referencing that.
So we just we do get access to emails, and we look at the evidence that we've been provided. I'm not going to necessarily pontificate what else happened because we have no evidence of it.
And you've named 555 in the Ontario Place report, so I'm wondering if you can say who participants D, A, B, M, O, P, R, and Z are.
So we purposely do not put commercial information, commercially sensitive information in our reports. So I know that it has been published that who the participants were, but because we're showing some rankings of how their submissions were ranked, we felt that it was necessary to anonymize those participants in the report.
On Service Ontario, the non-compliance of with its quality assurance program thresholds, were there any noted non-compliances in regards to the French Language Services Act specifically?
We did not look into that when we were looking at Service Ontario, so I cannot answer that, sorry.
Auditor, I wanted to ask, hi, I'm Emma from the Law. I wanted to ask about the MZOs, sorry to keep bouncing around. You mentioned the former Deputy Chief of Staff in particular with some of those anecdotes. Are we able to get a name or which minister that person was working for?
Sorry, say the last part again?
Are we able to get the name of that Deputy Chief of Staff or, which minister they were working for? Anything to indicate?
Minister of Housing and Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing.
The current one or the former one?
Former.
Was it Kirsten Jensen?
We left it anonymous in our report on purpose. Thank you.
Can I just go back to opioids for a second? So the report says that the recommendation is develop a new strategy that takes into account best practices. The report notes the benefits of these supervised consumption sites. And the government says it's accepted this recommendation. But are you saying that the government should reopen, should expand these sites? And that's clearly not what the government's saying.
So our recommendation is to really do a opioid-focused strategy like they had done in 2016, and to and the Chief Medical Officer of Ontario has also stated that having substance-based strategies is a best practice. So we're asking them to really focus on opioids themselves as opposed to the strategy that they have now, which is more around addictions in general. So that is our recommendation. And then as they do the studying, they can look into the latest and greatest of best practices in helping people with opioids addictions.
Just going back to the anonymization, I'm Jack Hallen with the Trillium Medical. I was wondering why you chose to anonymize the IO VP in the Ontario Place report.
We don't name names in our reports. We put positions. It's quite often unfair to be naming people's names in a public report like that. So I feel that it's more important to just put the position of the person.
Did that stand out to you, though, as being strange or unusual that a VP from Infrastructure Ontario would get so involved in the process as to have conversations with some of the entrants and to, almost help them manicure what their submissions would have been?
In a normal procurement, that would be very unusual. This is more like a real estate transaction. So if you can imagine, if you're selling your house, you're probably going to show it around to people and do that sort of thing. So you'll have conversations and that sort of thing. But if this was a proper procurement, it would be very unusual. Yes.
If this was like selling your house, you wouldn't necessarily tell all of the bidders how to bid and help them with their bids because they're all competing interests, right?
So we don't know if they helped them with their bids and what was exchanged because it wasn't documented. So I can't tell you what occurred in those meetings or calls at all.
Was there any suggestion, anything that you uncovered about why the Science Centre was moved out to Ontario Place?
In our report last year, we took a look at the business case that was done to decide to move the Science Centre. they looked at renovating the old one versus moving to the new one. So we looked at the Science Center decision at that time. All I can say now is that it's $400 million higher than it was at when they did that business case. So some of that is changes in scope. They're putting in some ramps for school bus turnarounds and things like that. So they've made a decision to move it to Ontario Place, and that is the government's decision that they made.
This is a value for money audit, and the cost to build a new science center is now more expensive than the stated cost of renovating the science center. What do you think is the most value for taxpayers' money?
It's a very good question. We did look at that, and some of the cost escalation is construction costs. So that would happen also if you were renovating. Time has gone by, and so things are more expensive. So the renovation costs would go up as well, just to level set that. But when it comes to value for money, we'd really have to look at the Science Center when it's done and see how it's operating and see how many people are going there, that sort of thing, to see if it is providing the value to the people of Ontario that we would expect.
Auditor, on the P3s and the Mississauga, the new Mississauga Hospital, I'm Rob Ferguson from the Toronto Star, by the way. Some of us we're supposed to identify ourselves. According to Colin's order.
I said hello before.
Anyway, is the P3 model kind of broken? I know they've adjusted it to try to keep more bidders coming, but when you're doing massive infrastructure projects and you're only getting like one bidder, what's going wrong and how can they fix that?
So I've followed the P3 model for many years of my career, and it has evolved over time. I would say that Ontario is the most mature in P3 modeling compared to other provinces. But the one bidder, they did try and make it a progressive P3 to try and attract more bids. I believe that, some of the infrastructure issues in the past, like Highway 427, et cetera, have shown that sometimes bidders have issues with the P3 model. So I would give Infrastructure Ontario and the Ontario government credit for the fact that they're evolving it to try and take care of those issues. What we found is that in this case, it didn't attract more bidders, and we're pointing out that they should continue to try and adjust it so that they can get more bidders.
What are some of the issues that bidders have with the model? They think they're on the hook too much?
Yes, it's the risk sharing of the model. So if you have a fixed price and your prices go up, you're the one that's going to be losing the profits from that. So it really is how much risk is being shared with the government and how much they're taking on themselves.
So is the government going to have to reduce the risk that it wants the contractors to take to get more bidders?
And that is what the progressive model is doing. So you're going to design the building.
We've been listening to a press conference live down at Queen's Park with the province's Auditor General releasing several value for money audits in her reports, learning about the $2.2 billion for redeveloping Ontario Place, that the cost had increased by $400 million. Also learning more about the audits of supervised drug consumption sites. We'll have more on this report throughout the morning.